Wargamers, you Wargamer artists, welcome to another podcast here in the studio. And we're going to have a great topic today. And any of you on my Discord who've been following know what that topic is. We're going to kill some time here while we're waiting for folks to get into the chat, including my special guest, Sammy. Sammy is going to be on the podcast again today. And let's go ahead and get this started. You guys can, if you've not seen this, you'll see it now. Wait for guys to get into the...
Well, folks, this is an incredible story. It's a story that attracts 400,000 people a year from all over the world come through that gate. The vast majority of them, 90% of the time, never been here in their lives.
Look at that view. The Battle of the Little Bighorn. We're going to dive into this today, folks.
It's always the same. 90% of the folks come here, never been here in their life, and yet, except for these little tykes over here, there's nobody in this audience who's never heard of George Armstrong Custer. There's nobody in this audience who's never heard of Sitting Bull or Crazy Horse. And I promise you this, there's nobody here who's never heard of Elvis Presley. Well, folks, it's a simple story, and yet it's a complex story. You are on the battlefield right now.
Now, this is by far, guys, one of the best presentations I have seen.
The notch in the hill way out there, 5 miles. On June 25th,
now down in that valley. Hey, Sammy's on the chat.
Located about 1.5 miles to 2 miles to the south of us, down in the river valley bottom. There's 8,000 people in that village. 1,500 to 2,000 of them are warriors. Custer's going to have 647 troops. It's the only battlefield in the country, only one of 2 in the whole world, where white markers indicate where soldiers were killed on the battlefield and buried where they fell.
Hey, Simon's in the house today.
Just to the left of this gentleman, 17 warrior markers across the battlefield.
Sammy, did you get your link? I sent you your link on your Discord.
They're not buried on the battlefield. They're picked up very quickly and later buried in trees.
You can find this entire video, guys, on YouTube. It's a C-SPAN video. Sammy is backstage.
Disinterred a year later, what was left of him, placed in a box about this big, taken back to West Point, where he's buried today. 5 years after the battle, skeletal remains all over the ground.
He's in the green room. We call that the green room. Sammy's back in the green room. He'll be joining us shortly. Anyone that's watching this in the replay, get over and watch this video.
To hang on to their very way of life. And behind us, a national cemetery with the remains of nearly 5,000 veterans and their families not related to the battle, like Arlington, veterans, Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Closed in 1978, full to capacity today. Well, folks, it's quiet here now. It's peaceful.
Welcome to the stream, guys. Welcome to the podcast. Come on in. Usually within 24 hours of the final close of the podcast, you can replay the podcast to see the comments. It varies. We're typically keeping the podcast now at about an hour.
Eagle bone whistle shrieking across the battlefield in the dust and the smoke. Warriors getting closer and closer and closer, desperately trying to destroy the soldier command. Apocalypse, that little bighorn. Custer's final battle. How did this happen? Why did it happen? Well, folks, it's really a culminating event because it marks nearly 400 years.
All right. Yes, guys, we're going to be talking about a famous battle from history, but this battle, I don't think I've ever seen anyone war game this battle. You guys may have seen it in your wargaming travels, but I have not seen it. And I think that's going to be the theme of next several podcasts. And thanks to Sammy, he had a great idea to do this, and that is to pick out some famous battles from history, but battles that are not necessarily the type of battles you see at gaming conventions or other war gaming outlets, including club games, etc. And these are battles that are really deep, really, really deep. There's a lot of facets to these battles. And this battle in particular, it's something kind of out of the blue. A lot of guys know about. And as we have prepared for this podcast, there's been all kinds of things we've uncovered. I did know about General Custer. It turns out my wife and I did a bike ride there right by where he was born here in Ohio. It's near Scio, down on the southeast side of Ohio. And let me tell you, we rode our bikes there one summer afternoon, and it was in the middle of nowhere, kind of down by New Philadelphia. Anybody who may be familiar with Ohio. But yeah, it's good stuff. Good stuff. So we're not going to officially start here. We've got another 5 minutes or so. I kind of wanted to show that video preview for those who watch the replay to definitely get over to YouTube and watch the entirety. That video is just shy of 40 minutes. And he is one of the good park rangers. You get some good ones, you get some bad ones. I've had the fortune to have a lot of good rangers in my day at the Park Service when I take tours. They've got to pass tests on the history, depending on what battleground they are touring. I know the one for Gettysburg is pretty tough. It's not easy to become a Gettysburg tour guide. You have to be certified and you have to pass testing. So that's a good thing, right? So you want someone competent leading your tour, that's for sure. How many of you guys, we got some guys already in the studio. How many of you guys are experts on the Battle of the Little Bighorn? Anybody? Anyone out there? Have you ever seen anyone game the Battle of the Little Bighorn? Anyone? I haven't seen anyone. Be involving, obviously, purchasing some Sioux Indians, especially on horseback, and modeling some cavalry infantry. Hey, Wargaming with Gary's here. Hey, what's up, Gary? He's got a great channel, and he's making his man cave. So yeah, it's an interesting. Simon says he has seen a game of the Little Bighorn. Awesome, man. Was it at a convention, I might ask? Or was it just like a club game, maybe? I'm not sure. But yeah, so collecting some miniatures. I didn't really look. I'm sure they're out there. I'm sure there's some cavalry miniatures, 28 mil, maybe even 15 mil from Old Glory. And, you know, getting out the fleece. Oh, Simon says Maida's got a small 7th Cavalry force and Indians, but not really seen them in use. Cool. Something you could even do really kind of a skirmish setup. You wouldn't really need to do a full-blown battle setup. You could just do the Battle of, I believe it's Culp's Hill, the final stand, Custer's last stand. Interesting battle. Once we start digging into this thing, I've got some pull-ups here to put up on the screen for you guys. We're going to go over kind of how the battle went down on the micro level, and really the whole point. Why did this battle happen? There was a lot of things came together. It was really a forming of like the perfect storm. Okay, this was a perfect storm. This had been brewing for years, like a lot of battles, and like what we're going through now in the world, guys, with the coof. What's really is a perfect storm, and we're in it. We're in the storm. There's a lot of facets to this thing. A lot of greed coming out, huh? A lot of deception, a lot of things swirling around. Who do you believe? Who do you trust? Well, these are the same kind of things that have played out throughout history, guys. Like I've said on the channel before, multifaceted, this hobby. I can't think of another hobby that is this deep and has so many aspects to the hobby, as in just that's way beyond buying models and painting models. We picked this battle. Sammy picked this battle actually, and I got to tell you, I was like, wow, okay, where did that come from? But once you start digging into this thing, there's a lot going on. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I hope Sammy can make it into the room here. I don't see him yet. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to pull up my first kind of thing we need to, we kind of, you know me, I'm an agriculture guy. I like to get down to the root. I like to get right down to the foundation. Number one, battle. We're dealing with another battle here. What were they fighting over? It's probably what most battles are fought over, guys. Land. Land. It's the same theme. What do we have with land? Well, possible farming, possible mineral resources, a lot of stuff going on. Now, this battle took place in 1876. However, in 1873, we had a financial collapse here in the post-Civil War USA. Bank currencies back then, each bank had their own currencies. There was a currency crisis. And General Grant, ex-General Grant, was the president of the United States at that time. So far, no, Sammy, I cannot see you in the green room. Let's go ahead and remove this. So let's dig down a little deeper. We know the premise of the battle: land. Now, here's the thing. In 1868, the U.S. government had made a final settlement with the Sioux, the Lakota, and they told them they could have the Black Hills. Now, this was fought close to the Black Hills. Now, they had put a lot of the Sioux and Lakota onto reservations. The Great Sioux Reservation was in Montana. Let's see if we can get Sammy another link. Let me do an invite here. Hold on, bear with me, guys. I just fired him another link. You got to click on that HTTPS. So that's up. See if we can get Sammy in the studio here, guys. There he is.
There we are.
Oh, what's up, man?
How you doing? I just want to check there's no feedback before I.
No, you sound great. It sounds really
Okay.
good. I even like the background.
Yeah, I thought I'd flip it around.
Yeah, that looks good, man. Good. Welcome. On the background screen here on the podcast, I did find a good lithography of the battle. That's a famous lithography. So we got there in the background. But so Sammy had asked me to go over my portion of the show would be some of the background of General Custer. Now, we've laid the lay of the land here, so to speak. We're fighting over land. the U.S. government had told the Lakota and Sioux they could have this land called the Black Hills. Why was it Black Hills? Well, it was covered in evergreen forests that were a lot of Scotch pine, a lot of basically spruce, varieties of spruce that get really dark. And there was a rumor floating around there was gold in them thar hills and the Black Hills. And of course, the U.S. being in a financial crisis and essentially a mini depression, there was a lot of folks that wanted to go, including the U.S. government, to go out there and claim this gold. Well, they sent surveyors to the Black Hills, and they did. They found gold. There was gold in them thar hills. So there is the other impetus with the land. And basically, the U.S. Army, for those of you who did not watch the video, the C-SPAN video I posted yesterday, the bottom line is the U.S. government said, I'll tell you what, we'll give you $7 million for those hills. And the Sioux said no.
I think it was $70 million, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
crazy.
It might have been 70 million. It was like they just weren't going to take any money. So the U.S. government tried to lease the land from them, said, look, let us come in and take the gold, and then we'll pay you. No, they didn't want that either. So basically what ended up happening, they gave them an ultimatum and said, we're going to give you by the 1st of January, 1876 to get out of this area. If you're not back on the reservations, which was Southwest Montana, the Great Sioux Reservation, we will consider you hostile and we will forcibly remove you to the reservation. So it was an or else type of edict. So this is the first facet of this battle, guys. This was another example, and you can follow this back throughout history, where essentially what I gather from this, from researching it this week, was the U.S. military for years have been getting their butts kicked by the Indians in the West. And they basically finally let them just have some very large tracts of land. And until this crisis came along, financial crisis, there was really no reason to push the Indians on this. There was tons of land out there. It was, millions of acres.
Yeah, Alan, if I can just interrupt as well, I think
sure.
at that stage, are we getting feedback there?
No, you're good.
Okay. At that stage, yeah, the US had actually settled California and some of the other areas actually further to the west. But they'd almost, as you say, they'd given that central land around the Black Hills and north of that to the Indians, and they'd almost just kind of skipped around it,
Right.
So it's not like we assume a straight push west, But,
right. Correct. And they had the Dakota Territory, which there was no North and South Dakota yet. So they were forming these territories, and they were kind of exploring around. But those Sioux and Lakota were tough cookies. Any of you that have followed Dances with Wolves.
And the Cheyenne.
Especially the Cheyenne.
Yeah, very, very renowned.
Very fierce warriors, very fierce warrior culture. And so essentially, it was like I said at the start of the podcast, this was like a brewing storm. It was the perfect storm. It had all these elements coming together. You had the brash George Custer, or Custer coming in, and he had something to prove because he had basically had no war to fight. The Civil War was over. He was a hero. So I'll go briefly into some of the history. I'll pull up, my source. You can't always trust Wikipedia, but I kind of fact checked this a little bit, and you'll find that you go to this, it's pretty straightforward. Now, he had a successful military career, because when I first started into this rabbit hole with Custer, my thought was this. Well, first of all, I didn't realize he was from Ohio, and he was born in a town that I was literally 3 miles from a year ago on a bike ride. I had no idea. But no, he had a successful military career. He was a brash, fierce cavalryman. He had been in the Battle of Bull Run. He'd been in almost every major battle in the Civil War, including Gettysburg. In fact, it was his cavalry charge on the Confederate left flank, initially the first day of Gettysburg, that stopped Jeb Stuart's 6,000 cavalry strong attack on the flank of the Union. And so that was Custer that led.
Yeah, he was even known to be so brave that I remember there was one report of him in a Civil War battle, and he charged so fast ahead of his men that he was the only man who broke the lines,
Right.
of the Confederacy. It's amazing how he survived. I think he had 9 horses shot out from beneath him in his career.
Correct. And we're talking Brash, his cavalry unit, the 5th Cavalry, the Michigan Cavalry, which was essentially what we would consider today like the National Guard or a militia. They weren't considered regulars. They were considered volunteer cavalry. They were not regular army, even though he was a lieutenant initially when the war broke out, was quickly promoted to captain and then later to a brigadier.
And he was very young as well in those promotions.
The child general or the boy general.
Have you got a picture of him there, Alan?
Yeah, let's see. We'll get to a picture of him here. Now this is a picture of him at West Point, right? He was just a young lad. Right. So he was just a young lad. Now let's go. Now this is an interesting photo of him. Now this was during the Civil War with a guy he went to West Point with. So he had a rocketing career, but that brigadier position that he was in, which at this time he was still just a captain, he didn't have that star on his lapel. The thing with that was it was a battlefield commission, which means once the war ended, it was a temporary position, and he was right back down to captain at the end of the war, right? So he had a lot to prove. There was a lot going on. So I won't spend too much time.
Another point is that he actually graduated the bottom of his class at
right.
West Point. So he was kind of seen as a bit of a failure,
That and I watched a lecture on that, and the interesting thing was he was one of these guys who was really smart, but he just hated doing the schoolwork part.
Yeah.
So he was one of these guys that he would almost get kicked out, and then he would make up the work, and they would keep him in. One of those guys, he was very rambunctious. He was one of these guys that was getting into trouble all the time. He was insubordinate. He had been reprimanded for insubordination several times for not doing his full duty, like guard duty, et cetera, et cetera. So
he would have made a good pirate if he was a seaman.
Right. He was a pistol. There's pros and cons. There's guys that, military historians that say he would have been a terrible military leader. The others say he was a great military leader because he was brash and brave and wanted to make a name for himself. So, yeah, like Sammy said, the bottom line is he had basically earned his promotions. He was certainly a great factor in leading his men. And these guys had the red scarves. They were, I think he had some of the highest casualties of all the cavalry units during the Civil War. So he was up front. He was a guy that led, and he had this belief that he was lucky. He had Custer's luck, almost like a little bit like Crazy Horse, if you've studied Crazy Horse.
Yeah.
He thought he was invincible. Now, this comes into play later in the story because
we'll talk. I've actually got some notes on that. We'll talk about that a bit later about Crazy Horses, some of his
correct
things he did in the battle.
Amazing. But so getting back to the Civil War background of Custer, like I said, he was there from the first battle, and he was there standing outside on the porch at Appomattox while the papers for Lee's surrender were being signed. So he was literally involved from day one to the last day. Then he was transferred to Texas, well, first Louisiana, then to Texas, as they were reconstructing a lot of his soldiers under him, which was, I believe, quite a bit. There were several hundred. they were disgruntled. They wanted discharge from the military after the end of the war. They didn't want to be in the military, but they were being forced to rebuild roads and bridges and things like that. Basically, things that the soldiers didn't want to do. And Custer had a reputation for being very harsh on his men. He was known for shooting deserters without trial. And then he got in some trouble, as he was reassigned out west when the Congress realized, hey, we got to start squashing these Indians if we want to grab that land where there could be gold. It's kind of a brief synopsis of his Civil War career. And then by that time, he was sent to the new Fort Abraham Lincoln. And that's where they staged a lot of the assaults onto the Indian tribes.
Yeah. Do you want to pop up that image we have of all those conflicts that I sent you?
Yes. Let me pull that up real quick.
What we'll do is we'll kind of make it a little bit more clear.
Sure. I'll put that right up here. And we will go. We're actually going to pull that just off of your shares here.
Yeah, so basically it's a map that just kind of loosely shows you all the different forts that were constructed and just shows you all the conflicts that actually happened, all the skirmishes and the battles. And as Alan said, so when the US started to make that push into the plains area and clear up all the tribes that refused to settle on the reservation. So you had Sitting Bull that accumulated, as you said, the Cheyenne, is it? The Sioux and Lakota and Dakota tribes and other sub-tribes. So you had quite a number of them that had kind of refused to settle on the reservation. You know, they didn't want to sit there with no horses, no weapons, and just be given, bacon by the US government. They wanted to do what they'd always done. So, and if you go back to the last image, not that one, the last one.
Got it.
So yeah, as Alan said, when the US decided to make this expedition and push out the Indians from this central area, if you can see the Battle of Little Bighorn there on that large map, as Alan said, from the east of there, you had, what was it, Fort Lincoln, wasn't it?
Fort Abraham Lincoln.
Fort Abraham Lincoln, yeah. So you had Custer there, when his 7th Cavalry was only a scouting segment of the larger force, the larger army that was coming from the east. You had another army coming from the south that was actually beaten back just before this battle. They were beaten back, I think it was the Battle of Rosebud. And then you also had another force from I think it was the west. So before we go into this battle, what you got to understand is this army pushing from the east, Custer's 7th Cavalry were only a small proportion of that army. They were sent ahead to scout out and find the enemy. They only got engaged in this battle because Custer was so desperate for glory that he actually ended up engaging with a smaller force rather than waiting for the larger army to come through. But right. So if we look at this map here, obviously, it's the Great Plains area, and north of the Yellowstone River there, you had kind of the open plains, but you've got a lot of valleys here and rivers. So you've got you've got the Yellowstone River there, going from along the top there, and you've got all these subsequent rivers there flowing actually from south to north. And we've circled the area there because what you see is you see the Custer's force. They marched along the Yellowstone River, and then they progressed down the Rosebud River.
Yep.
And then they crossed. So when they got there, they'd actually started to they become quite strung out, So they had their baggage train falling behind. And Custer was so impatient. He sent his scouts out. The men would set up camp, and then as soon as they set their tents up, he says, "We're moving off again." So you understand, his troops were really tired. They were at the end of their tether by this point. And then they decided to, after setting up camp, woke them all up in the middle of the night, and we're marching west there, through those mountains. And at this point, the baggage train was so far behind, it actually got attacked, and they lost a lot of their hardtack supplies. Hardtack was those hard biscuits the sailors used to eat. And just to give you an example of who was there, it wasn't just soldiers. So we had about, I think it was 600 soldiers, wasn't it, Alan? 600-ish?
647.
And he also had engineers, miners, geologists. He had a band, photographers, 300 cattle. The son of U.S. president was there,
Yep.
and his brother-in-law, and then he obviously had various Indian scouts. But do you want to jump in here, Alan, or do you want me to continue?
Yeah, continue. You're doing great.
Yeah, so basically, do you want to load up the next image? And it's a bit of a zoomed in map of when they're passing through that mountainous region. They're heading towards the Little Bighorn River along an estuary. So this gives an example of the sort of terrain. So as you can see there, you're kind of going through a valley. So he progresses, and the first sign of Indians they see is this there's a small kind of settlement there of a few teepees, and they turn up there, and there's I think they find one dead tribesman or something like that. I can't quite remember.
Yeah, one of the warriors from a previous battle that had happened, I think, a month or so earlier. Yeah, so there was just a dead Indian in there.
That's it. Yeah. So it's a bit creepy. He wants to turn up to this deserted camp, and then he sees some retreating Indians, which we presume obviously are scouts. So Custer sends Reno. Is it Reno? It's Reno, isn't it?
Correct.
He's second in command. Yeah. So he sends him south of that river. I think around 200 troops, and he sends them south of the river to advance on the south side of that river, while he progresses along the north side. And you've got to remember that even though he had that 600 troops, because his baggage train was so far behind, he's constantly having to send Benteen back to, because they're moving so fast on horseback, and obviously the baggage train is moving at a snail's pace. They're constantly having to send troops back and make sure they're not getting attacked, bring up supplies, let them know where they're moving to next. So if you imagine, he's probably only got about 2/3 of his force actually up front here. So they progress through the valley here, constantly scouting out for the Indians. And I guess after this, we can bring up the larger map after this.
Yep.
The actual battlefield. So the previous map we saw was their approach. So on the right-hand side there, almost coming from the north, just east of Reno's entrenchment. So they've just kind of approached. You see the river running along the middle there. So they've kind of come from the top right of the map, and they've just arrived there.
Which was about the only time you would see trees. When you spotted trees, you knew there was water because it was a fairly arid area outside of grass.
Yeah. So his scouts report that, and you got to bear in mind, his scouts are, I think they're Crow Indians.
Yes.
And obviously, you've still got a lot of Crow Indians. This is Crow Indian territory, or the reservation at least.
Yes. Currently, it is a Crow Indian reservation.
Yeah. And so, he doesn't really entirely trust his scouts, is what we hear. So there's a peak. I think it's called Crow's Nest. So they hear reports of large dust. They had about 15,000 horses, the Indians, grazing between Custer and the camp there, which I'm sure you can see there. But obviously, from his position, he couldn't see the camp, all the horses grazing. So he sent his scouts up there. They reported seeing a huge number of enemy, and they advised him not to progress and wait for the army to, reinforcements. He went up there, and I think it was because of all the smoke. She had about, I can't remember how many were in the village, but there's such a large population of Indians there that all the smoke from their breakfast fires were actually kind of creating a smog over the landscape. So he couldn't, and all the dust from the horses, couldn't see anything. So he was thinking, okay, this is overplayed. The Indian scouts don't want me to attack. They're trying to buy time for their compatriots to escape. I want glory. I want to hunt them down. So, trying to get my head. Yeah, okay. So at this point, he says, right, where are we here? Okay, what's this map here?
So this is a map I pulled up from the C-SPAN video.
Oh, yeah.
Really a good map. I couldn't find it anyplace else.
Yeah, this is good.
It really shows you all the different tribes that had come together, right? That had refused to go back to the reservations. They said, look, if we're going to live the way we want. And if we die, then I guess we're just going to die. Is kind of how it was.
Yeah. And this was actually very unnatural for the Indians even to have such a large camp.
Yes.
Because as you know, the hunter-gatherers, they relied on they didn't farm. and you know, they relied on hunting the buffalo mainly and other animals, and so it wasn't really sustainable to have a large camp like this for a hunter-gatherer population. You know, you had to move on very quickly from an area like this before all the hunted animals, you know, didn't supply enough food. So this was almost kind of on a war footing camp, you know, and the Indians used to set up. They actually put, I think the Cheyennes, especially, they would always put their warriors on the outside of the camp, you know, for any enemies to approach. But should we, if we go back to that last major, sorry, Alan, can we go back to that last major picture and we'll talk about what happened at the start of the battle, maybe?
Sure. The one that you provided, or the one from this
yeah,
video?
the kind of overview one there where we saw the positions. I think it's kind of a good overview.
Okay.
If you, I mean, if you want to go into the how the battle started, it's up to you.
Well, the initial point was that I've learned through some of my research was this was a new tactic they had learned with the Indians. The Indians had changed their tactic. They were for a long period in the Plains Wars were hit and run, and the Indians acted as individuals. Now the Crazy Horse and some of the other warriors had started changing their tactics, where they were working more in unison and using more of a plan of attack, where they would hit just like the U.S. military. Someone would hit from one position and the other would flank, and they were starting to use flanking maneuvers. And this was unknown to Custer. This was a new tactic that the U.S. had decided back at the Fort Abraham Lincoln. The officers had gotten together and said, hey, we got to attack the village because they'll run. And once the village disperses, we can swoop in. Now, this is another tactic that the U.S. military used with the South. This, my opinion, was the way they won the Civil War. They started attacking civilians. The idea is that you prevent the enemy from resupply and especially feeding the troops. In this case, attack the Indian villages, destroy the Indian villages, killing Indian women and children, old people, because that was their base of support.
That's exactly what Custer's tactic was here. So he's approached. Do you want to go back to that map? Just makes it easier, I think. Yep. It's actually a complicated battle because it's all mainly cavalry based. There's so much movement. It's quite hard to get your head around. So let me get that up on my screen quickly so it's easy to describe. 1 second. But yeah, so here we are.
Which is a lot of people criticize that, say he split his forces into thirds.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that was a big mistake. Well, that was the new tactic. The tactic was send Reno in. He literally took 90 men and they formed a firing line, and they were firing into the village.
Yeah, so Reno, he sent Reno across the river, didn't he?
Yes.
To the south side. And his orders were not to actually attack the village. His orders were actually to he thought the Indians would be unprepared.
Disperse.
He sent Reno to actually capture women and children as hostages. Mm-hmm. And his plan was to actually then use that as leverage to lease the land. That was his original plan.
Yes.
When he sent Reno across the water.
Disperse them. Then the other force was sent to collect them.
Yeah.
And then Custer was.
And meanwhile, Custer would loop around the other side.
Correct. Kind of like a reserve almost.
Yeah. So should we talk about what actually happened when Reno actually got to the edge of that village there? So if you can see on the map,
Reno's part. Well,
Reno's first position there.
Point out when the Reno and them were approaching this huge Indian village. We're talking 6,000 to 8,000 Indians, and 1,500 to 200 to 2,000 of them were warriors.
Yeah, anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000, we estimate, don't we? They were actual warriors.
Yes, and the campfires, the early morning campfires, they couldn't really tell the size of the force because of the
like an LA smog.
Yes. So continue. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's okay. So Custer orders Reno. I think we had maybe around 200 men there, something like that, to cross the Little Bighorn River and approach the camp in order to take women and children. So Reno, from position 1 there, he's approached the outskirts of the camp, and they're still mounted. So he orders his men to hastily dismount as he sees, it's actually quite a bigger sentiment than they thought, and form a skirmish line. Because these mounted troops, even though they're essentially cavalry, light dragoons, these troops, we should point out, were very, very badly trained.
Green.
Some of them, yeah, great. They were very green. Like the U.S. Army at this point didn't even do fire drills. They didn't do target practice. They didn't do anything like that. Lots of these troops didn't even really know how to. They knew how to ride a horse, but they didn't know how to really kind of stop their horse, or do drills, or or do any kind of formation type of riding. And they definitely couldn't fire from the saddle. Well, most of them couldn't. So they were actually, even though they were a cavalry force, they tended to fight as infantry. So the cavalry was mainly a purpose just to move them. So they dismount and form a skirmish line, and they kill about 10 women and children. I don't quite know why this was. I think, as I said, they were supposed to capture them. So I don't know what made Reno change his mind, but he starts firing on women and children, kills about 10 of them, and then very quickly he's actually countered by, I don't know the name of the Indian chief that actually countered him, but Fizzy. So he confronts them at their front and very quickly outflanks them on their left flank. And before you know it, they're outgunned and outnumbered. So Reno has to retreat very quickly. Tries to kind of go to the woodland to his north. He's north towards the river, and starts taking heavy casualties. And he's almost in a panic. Oh, and I should say as well, when Reno's troops were advancing, and he told them to form into a skirmish line, just to illustrate how badly trained they were, he said, "Halt, dismount." 2 of the troops actually didn't know how to stop their horses and ended up going into the enemy camp, and they were later seen with their heads on spikes.
Yes, and one of them was a smith.
Was he a smith?
Private Smith.
Yeah. And also,
I just threw up a little animated map I found from the park.
Nice. Let's have a look.
It's kind of cool. The red blob over there is the Indian village, but you can see as they move through. Point B is your Reno.
Oh, gotcha.
You see the Indians ran back to the village.
Yeah.
And what he essentially did, Sammy, was he stirred the hornet's nest.
Yeah.
And they got pissed because some of the women and children were dropped with these 45 caliber. And that's, guys, you get hit with a 45 caliber, you're done.
These are big rounds.
Those are big rounds, and they're loud. And one of the Indian warriors, one of the top warriors by the name of Gall, Gall, he said when he was interviewed 10 years later, it made his heart turn evil or turn black. And which means that those warriors were basically a rampage at that point. They were out for blood. They wanted revenge.
Yeah, so you got to remember the advantages the Indians had were they were defending their families here and their livelihood.
Yes.
The warriors had years of battlefield experience. I mean, there were kind of 13, 14-year-olds fighting, but even they, had been in the saddle since they were born, and they had fantastic accuracy, and they could actually fire from horseback.
And they had repeating rifles also.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When they actually when they were actually looking at the battlefield, they burnt all the grass, and they actually did a scan, and they found a surprising amount of weaponry. The Indians actually had firearms. Sorry, so I think they estimated that it was about a good third had repeater rifles or pistols.
Yes.
So you had that dangerous combination of arrow fire and that repeater rifle fire.
And they were deadly accurate with those arrows.
Yeah, and the repeat. So you had not only more troops, but as you know, stuff like the Winchester. So you're not just going bang, putting the next bullet in like the Springfield, which the US troops had. These guys have Winchesters, so they're going to shoot,
right.
shoot. So they're more like carbines. So there's a hell of a lot of fire coming back at these guys, And obviously, the US Army did have the option to go for a repeater rifle, which would be more fast firing. But that's really for something to be, shot close range when you're moving fast. And because the troops were kind of fighting as infantrymen, those Springfield rifles gave them the extra range and was better for an infantryman. And as you know, a larger round. So that's why they went for that in the end. But I don't really think the weaponry would have made much of a difference had they had the carbines, or the fast reloading rifles. I think it was more of a lack of training, that really got them unstuck here.
Right. There was no comparison. The warriors, like you said, were a warrior society. They were hunters and warriors. And they had, from the time they were little, that's what they aspired to be. And they were fighting for something like in Dances with Wolves, something far more tangible, which was their way of life. And the bottom line is the U.S. military were hirelings to do the bidding of the large landlords that were wanting to move into these areas and control, the future rail system, et cetera, et cetera. So here we are. We have the perfect storm of greed. We're seeing it today. It playing out right now. Today, all the different facets to the whatever you want to call it. Everyone has an axe to grind. Everyone has their own motives in mind, and you're kind of seeing this here. The Indians had a very pure motive, and this was their way of saying, "Look, we're not going back to the reservation." So you can respect them for that. But just like throughout history, you will find that unfortunately, right isn't always right, and it ends up sometimes losing in the end, unfortunately.
So at this point in the battle, with so Reno's now had to pull back from that attack south of the river.
Yep.
And he's being harassed and attacked. So he's actually, let's say, they didn't even cover their retreat in a proper order. What they've actually done is they've crossed. It's a full route basically. It's a full route. So they've been surrounded and shot at, and I think he lost about 60 troops. Was it 30 to 60 troops? I can't remember now. It escapes me.
Oh, yeah, it was almost 80%.
So he's lost a huge amount of his troops, and they've kind of gone back across the river and gone back up the hill to what's called Reno's entrenchment, almost where Custer started from.
Yep.
So, and they've started to dig in there with the spoons, whatever they had in their back, knapsacks. They were carving into the hard dirt, just trying to kind of dig in to get some sort of cover. And the Indians were kind of surrounded them with a skirmish line on that hill. And in the meantime, Custer has now moved along the river, and he's going to try and his original plan was to support Reno's attack. I'm not sure if he's aware at this point that Reno's been beaten back. He's probably just starting to get these messages. But so he tries to attack across the river, send half his remaining force that he has across that river there to cross the Indian, into the Indian encampment from the other side. Now, the Indians knew this was going to happen. And they'd put skirmishers in the long grass. So as soon as they try and cross that river, they're lit up, with fire. And then the original force that had countered Reno, half of them are sent back to support that defense. And Custer loses a lot of troops, loses a lot of troops there, and has to retreat back across the river up to what is known as Last Stand Hill. Now, at this point, another force, and this is where Crazy Horse comes in, who you mentioned earlier. He takes a detachment of cavalry, takes them north. So you've got the U.S. detachment under Custer retreating across the river now. So and the Indians engaging them from the other side of the river, and now they're following them up onto the high ground as they retreat. Crazy Horse and some other warriors go to the north, and they actually come up behind Last Stand Hill, where Custer's troops are kind of making a stand. And actually, at this point, they get some good ground and actually the momentum changes slightly. The Indians start taking some losses. So some of the Indians actually start retreating, and this is just an example of what Crazy Horse did. Him and another warrior trying to encourage their troops, telling them not to run away, ran up within medium range of the hill. And as you can imagine, the soldiers there, probably about 80 of them at this point on that flank, are firing, like bang, putting the round in, reload, bang again. So they're firing in volleys still. They're still quite organized like that. And he rides across within close distance of them and survives 3 rounds of fire from 80 troops, which just shows how bad the accuracy was at the time. So he manages to get the Indian troops retreating after that brave, display. and they actually hammer and anvil the Custer troops. And this is actually where Custer gets died. So you're entering hand-to-hand combat now. The tomahawks are out, the clubs are out, and by this point, Custer has ordered his men to shoot his own horses.
Yes.
Just so they're going to hide behind the bodies of the horses, and they've now switched over to their Colt revolvers.
Yep.
They're running low on ammunition. They're getting pretty desperate at this stage. And another thing to point out, the advantage of the Indians had, despite the ones we've already talked about, is if you imagine, you're approaching a fortified hill. There's lots of dips. So if you can aim your rifle down and shoot a soldier, but if they're in a little dip, you can't see them. So the Indians were taking advantage of this and arc firing their bows over and just constantly, so they could hide in a blind spot and just take pop shots at the enemy here. So quite a brutal set of circumstances for the guys on that hill.
Custer's luck had just run out.
Yeah,
and the Indians were definitely taking their revenge.
Yeah, I mean, and then obviously, as we know, pretty much everyone on that hill gets wiped out. The surviving forces retreat to where Reno's entrenched, and then fire kind of continues all the way till 9 p.m. at night, when Benteen, who was in between the baggage train, finally catches up to Reno's entrenchment, reinforces. The Indians continue to skirmish with them. So basically, the Indians order the camp, right, start packing up, we'll keep them busy and let's get out of here, let's hightail out of here. So by the next day, the Indians have managed to get away safely. They've left some skirmishes to keep the cavalry occupied, and that's the end of the battle. And at the end of it, I think we had 268 US casualties, around 135 casualties on the Native Indian side, although that's disputed because they always underreported their casualties, and obviously 10 women and children died in that engagement, mainly from Reno's attack.
Yeah, I mean, it was a perfect example of a complete military snafu based upon faulty information that the military was providing to Custer and his other commanders on the exact numbers of Indians that had left the reservation. The reservationists, the guys who were running the reservations, were underreporting how many Indians had left to leave, and so that they could get the same amount of supplies coming into the reservation, so they could sell out on the black market. Basically, total corruption. But yeah, so that's the kind of things that were going on. It was, like I said, it's really the perfect storm. These are some of the Indian warriors that had lived to later tell about the massacre, which was still the beginning of the end of the last hurrah of the Plains Indians.
They won the battle but lost the war.
They lost the war, unfortunately.
Pyrrhic victory.
And even in Ohio, where I live, we have the legend of Tecumseh. We have the Sugarloaf Mountain Amphitheater that reenacts it in the summers. And I can drive around and show you thousands of acres in Ohio that are not being farmed because the agriculture department pays the farmers not to farm so that they can keep the price of the grains, corn, soybeans high. So it's a manipulated market by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And you had all these Indians, they ran out of Ohio. And here we have lands that they could have lived on, probably in harmony with the whites, like the Cherokee did. But we're driven off their lands. And now here we are, we've got literally land that is unused. It just sits. And it's despicable. And that's same with the Plains. You've got all that land out there that really no one is using. It's considered the Bureau of Land Management. They basically control hundreds of thousands of acres that are literally just vacant. And the ranchers that try to use this land, especially in times of drought when they need to graze larger areas, they've got to get special permission from the Bureau of Land Management. and they can be fined. And some of the ranchers have fought back. Some of that news may have made it over to Europe, but we've had some standoffs over here with the ranchers and the BLM.
Yeah, I've been saying that. Yeah, especially in Canada as well.
Correct, and it's the same thing. It's a bunch of nonsense. The government having control over these huge swaths of land that the ranchers should be able to use. They're U.S. citizens that are operating a business raising cattle, and they have to. By the time they sometimes get special permission to graze on these public lands, like the cattle are dropping like flies because they're starving. Or they can't get access to water. Say their creek that runs through the rancher's land is dried up, but there's a larger tributary, maybe 5 to 10 miles over, they could drive the cattle to. And the Bureau of Land Management, well, now hold on, you got to fill out this paper and that paper, and by the time the papers are stamped, the cattle are dead. And the rangers get tired of that, or the ranchers get tired of that, so they'll drive their cattle over to these tributaries, and they'll get $100,000 fines, so much per head of cattle, because you drank the water without permission.
It's almost this kind of whole situation just came to me now. It's almost kind of like the situation in Syria. So the US sent essentially an expeditionary force over to during the Syrian civil war. They send out some troops to go and secure the oil fields, on the east side of the Euphrates River, right where right almost the edge of Iraq. So they and they use local tribes, as it were, like they did with some of the Indians here, and they secure the resource, which isn't gold this time, which is oil, and set up camp there and divide the forces. They've got no interest in settling the land, no interest in changing government. They're there just for the oil, just like the gold, and it's for economic reasons. And it's kind of what's really changed, What's really changed.
So that's something we as war gamers, part of our hobby is we need to learn this stuff. Is just keeps repeating over and over again, instead of getting the governments out of the way and letting the people resolve things. You find that when the first pilgrims came over to the United States, or the colonies at that time, the Jamestown colony, the Indians helped them. The Indians helped them survive. That's why they had the first Thanksgiving. They sent how many ships over, and the colonists would just disappear. They would say, well, we dropped off a load of them last year, and here we are again, and they're just gone. Well, they just died. They the wolves, the bears ate them after they died of starvation, typically. They didn't know how to survive in the wilderness, but the Indians came in and taught them. And find that when I studied this through the years, especially with Tecumseh, he was actually friends with a lot of the settlers, and they did, the Shawnee and a lot of the settlers literally lived in peace. It was when the whites, the Euro colonists, would break agreements, is when the
Euro Americans, as opposed to the Native Americans. Yeah, that's a phrase I learned earlier. That's quite useful.
Right, and they were always breaking the terms, and the Indians would retaliate, and then they, of course, were made out to be the bad guys. So you find this a lot of times, even with traveling. You travel abroad. When I've traveled abroad, really, most people, they get along just fine. It's just when you get the greed creep in, this greed, this nasty greed that's in us, some of us, a lot of us.
That's what makes this battle so interesting, is because it really is a time where industrialization was really kind of kicking off, and the Western world was desperate for resources. And as we know, this battle took place 100 years after the War of Independence. So the US had been, 100 years old now at this stage. The economy was struggling, and I think after this battle, I can't remember what city it was. It might have been Philadelphia, but they built something like 500 buildings. They almost built the city instantly, just to kind of to raise their prestige and kind of show their ingenuity. They were really trying to. Well, or if you look at Deadwood, a town in the West, which is kind of an old kind of dust town, cowboy town. When this gold rush, these rumors of gold rush were rife. I think that town went from like 200 to 5,000 population in a
Yes.
matter of months. And there was. It's almost like the fake news media we have now. Someone's found a bit of gold, and they told the population, literally, oh, you walk along the grass and you keep stubbing your toe on pieces of gold.
Yes.
So these people were. You can't blame the individuals. They've come from Europe. The people that have come over here from Europe, they've gone to the West Coast. They've obviously found no luck there, and now they're taking. They might be second generation at this point, third generation. Now they're desperate just to make a living. So they've come to the New World. They haven't found their living there in the East. So now they're trying to take the trip west, which is very perilous. You're getting ambushed, you're getting attacked. You can get cholera, which is very common. From poisoned water supplies. It's by no means an easy feat. So these people coming, even though we think of them as an army, a lot of them were just kind of village, army followers. They were people that are desperate, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, yeah,
They
and
were.
the land that was available to most immigrants, they would have giant, like a land grab. If you went past a certain area, they would assign an area that was open to settlement. And if you went there and staked your claim, you would have a flag that they would give you, the U.S. military would give you, and you would ride to this area that was designated by the military, and you would stake your claim. Back in the frontier days of where I'm from, Kentucky and Ohio, you could do what's called a hatchet claim, where you would go down lines of trees and you would take your hatchet and just cleave off segments of the bark, and that was your claim. You found later when the lawyers came to town, when they started establishing the little towns, they would steal these claims from people like Daniel Boone and Simon Kenton. There's a lot written about that, but here's another aspect I wanted to throw in here.
Well, just on that point, it's funny how you say those old laws of claims, because even in the UK to this day, say you have a piece of land in the country, and you have a farmer next door to you. From personal experience, what you can actually do is, say you've got a fence post there, and that farmer's got a lot of land. You can push that fence post 10 meters out, build a new fence post, and I think, even still today, under the law, if it's not challenged within 10 years, that land becomes yours.
Correct.
So I just thought it was funny.
We have that
those laws
too.
those ideas of claim still kind of exist. But carry on.
A lot of shady stuff that goes on with land. But now this is a common theme too that runs through history, especially in Europe. If you follow the fighting between the Catholics and the Protestants and all the 30 Years' wars and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw a term out here that was used over here from the time that the settlers landed, and it's bringing in religion, and the term is manifest destiny. Manifest destiny. That is, God has ordained this. God has given this land to us, and it is our right to claim it, to take it from the savages, to tame the savages, and we are going to claim the land for God, because we are Christians.
Yeah, I didn't really consider that aspect.
Manifest destiny. It was something that was bandied by a lot of the politicians of the time. That the old Crusader theme with God is on our side. The Nazis. God is on our side. World War I especially. So this is another whole aspect of motivation, where a settler felt, hey, this is land that's given to us by God.
Mm-hmm.
This is manifest destiny. We wanted to claim the land from sea to shining sea, and so the Pacific side of things is another whole interesting aspect. But the seaports that they established to establish trade with the Chinese, the Japanese, the Southeast Asians. So that goes way, way, way back. But so yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot going on with this era, and I have not ventured much past. Now, the farthest west I've been is Minneapolis. I went to university at Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is the west side of the Mississippi. But that's something that's on the bucket list. We definitely want to go out that way at some point, especially Yellowstone. But
I'd love to go to Yellowstone. Yeah,
it's such a fascinating period of history, and there's
and
still a
they
lot of.
reckon that's due an eruption. They reckon it's 100 years past, so that's
Oh, I
it
mean,
could pop at any minute.
there's still open land out there, and occasionally the BLM does auction off, land cheap.
Mm.
But this is a whole point of contention. We have this thing over here called federal lands that should be, managed by the citizens. You got some towns out there in Montana, Utah, the Dakotas. The entire town is employed by the BLM, Bureau of
That's
Land Management.
Bureau of Land Management, not Black Lives Matter, I assume.
It's just this huge bureaucracy to supply jobs. And a
Right.
lot of these people, they don't even really work. They just get a check from the
Mm.
BLM. It's ridiculous. It's nonsense, but it's beyond my pay grade. But I tell you, it's when I started digging into this battle and all the different facets, other
Yeah.
than the Indians, they had this more simple uh, way of explaining what they were doing. But when you started considering Custer's motivations, the motivations of his
Yeah.
higher ups, his sub commanders, even apparently both of his sub commanders, Reno and them, hated his guts because of that previous battle. And I don't
Yeah.
recall the name of it, but he was,
Battle of Rosebud.
yes. And there was
Oh no,
some
sorry.
standing,
No, I don't think Custer was in that battle. I might have got that wrong. So you mean the battles that they were previously with him in the past?
right. Apparently there was a like 18 troops that were sent out as a scout force, and they didn't report back in the time they were supposed to. And Reno came to Custer and said, "Hey, we've got to go send out a party to look for them and help them." And Custer said, "No." Well, they later found their bodies, and he had never forgiven him for that.
But I think one thing about Custer is it seems that he was a good cavalry commander. So when working under a general and working localized on a battle, he had good tactics.
Yes.
But he wasn't necessarily had any experience, nor was he actually given power in this situation to actually lead this battle. I think he was desperate for that glory. I think his wife mentioned that he was pushing eventually to become almost a celebrity and almost get into U.S. president office. So he really was desperate for this to kind of make him. So it doesn't necessarily mean he knew tactics on a larger scale, a strategy as it were. I think he was a good cavalry commander, brave, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're necessarily the best at moving troops in larger formations.
Right. And Grant did not want him there. Grant had to, as a political maneuver, let him stay in the uniform. There was a series of allegations and hearings. Imagine that, we have hearings over here, endless congressional hearings, where there was a scandal where Grant and some of his friends, as it were basically bilking the army for supplies and things. There was requisitions that were never supplied yet paid for, and Custer testified against Grant and his friends that there was a conspiracy to defraud the taxpayers. Imagine that. So these are the
nothing changes.
same kinds of themes we're dealing
Yeah.
with to this day. His wife, her father, she was an only child, spoiled little girl, was a I believe a banker, and he was a Republican. Custer was a known Democrat. He did not want her to marry him, but yet he wanted to keep climbing up that ladder. So you have all these interpersonal things starting to creep into the story of this battle, all the way down to even the Indians had something to prove. The higher chiefs thought, hey, if we could stand up and beat them in some 2 or 3 decisive battles, they might just back down and leave us alone.
What's interesting about reading some of the Indian accounts, even before this period, 20 years before this period, is when they kind of when you had some of these scouts that first started engaging and even living with the Indians, taking hostage and whatnot. I remember the Indians, they'd hear about the Queen of England, and I can't remember the name they used to have for her. They used to call her the White Queen or something, or I can't remember the name now; it escapes me. But they, when the Westerners described to them what London was like, or what the West was like, these cities, it's beyond comprehension for them, because you're talking about a very small population of Indians. Like, it's debatable how many there actually were in the height, but definitely no more than 200,000. And these are scattered into small tribes. Even the tribes themselves, all hunter-gatherers spread out, sending messages between each other. You're talking encampments of a few hundred here and there. Occasionally they might meet in the thousands, but very rarely. And they didn't quite understand this industrial. A few settlers come along, and then the more they didn't quite understand the millions of white people. We're going to crush down upon them. The sheer scale and the never-ending, number of them were going to keep coming their way. And I think they started towards the end, even after this battle, and they won. I think they started to realize, the sheer might of the force they were fighting against. Which is very sad, really.
It was unstoppable, and
yeah,
it's another theme that is discussed in Dances with Wolves. That there was going to be no end to the whites coming through their land and the destruction that would be done. So one of the statistics that was thrown out in the video the other day was when the whites first crossed the Mississippi, there was 60 million buffalo.
That's right. Yeah.
By the time we got to 1890, there was only 500 left.
500, yeah. And as you said, that was the main source of the Indians made so much out of those, and really that was their main source of supply. Correct. And as hunter-gatherers, what could they hunt after that? And as I say, they always hunted them responsibly. The population thrived under them. They'd shoot a few, but allow the herd to. How we almost we responsibly hunt these days with deer. You don't hunt certain seasons. You allow the population to rise, and it's manageable. But as I say, you see that greedy industrial white man come along.
Yes. And
just slaughter everything. We see it with deforestation now. We see it with everything.
Yes, we still see the same themes today through most of the wargaming periods. So we'll have to start thinking between the two of us, the next podcast,
so many.
Another battle we can touch on that really a lot of guys don't game. And this would be a great idea for someone out there. I've got projects lined up for the next 2 years, but this would be a great project for someone to dig in. And I have my desert fleece out here that I could eventually, maybe after 2022, maybe delve into this period more, the whole Indian wars, the Plains Wars. And then there's so much to do. Then you get into like the battles with Tecumseh and the Iroquois and their struggles before they were finally
the Iroquois in the French Indian War.
Yeah, and there's just so much to do. It's so deep, this era.
Yeah, and, there's so much we can. It depends really what everyone else wants to see. I mean, we could go to we talk about pirates. We could talk about Second World War. We could talk about anything. I think it's whatever people find interesting. Really, it's just giving a little taste here and there and seeing the similarities and what we can learn from it.
Right. There's all.
I think this battle was interesting because it's kind of sad. It's the last stand of a native people against the modern world. That's what I find most kind of touching about this one.
I'm sure there's confrontations we can find from the Second World War that are kind of obscure, but the same kind of things coming together that you could talk about, some of the stuff in North Africa, that there were tribes and things that were wiped out. So something to think about. Let's put our heads together here over the next week, the next few days, and see if we can come up with something else that's got a little flavor like this. That's really not gamed. There's another aspect that I was looking into from a magazine I was reading, from the First World War with the Northern Italian hill, the mountain campaigns that were fought up there. there were whole tribes of shepherds and things where they were wiped out because they got caught in the crossfires of some of
Right.
those battles.
Yeah, I mean, they were fighting they were fighting the Austro-Hungarians, weren't they? And also, would it have been the? Oh, I'm trying to forget now my history, but I think they were attacked from a few sides, weren't they, in those mountain areas?
So there's a lot of things through history that parallel the Indians. You could talk about the Germanic tribes. Well, they did a pretty good stand up against the Romans. The Romans actually.
Oh yeah, I'd love to talk about that one actually. The Cimbri,
Yes.
who came from modern day Denmark. You had the kind of almost mini ice age there, and they about 200,000 of them migrated south. The German tribes let them go through, and they crossed the Alps and found themselves in Roman territory. And there's some great first-hand accounts of that battle. I actually got a book on it. It's crazy, you know, and there's some great stories from that one.
And then you have the Hannibal, his whole group. They were essentially wiped out, and taken out completely over by the Romans.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, Carthage was destroyed, wasn't it?
Correct. They just laid waste to it. It was touched on in the movie Patton, where he was driving by in his Jeep and he says, pull over here. This is the battle. This is the battlefield. And he speaks of that battle where that was the last holdout of the Macedonians before they were basically massacred. Carthaginians, yes, I'm sorry. The Carthaginians were massacred because they kept standing up.
And again, they had great success, and it was just Hannibal didn't know how to capitalize on his success. That's why he didn't win the war. You know, he had Rome on there. You know, I think even to fight Hannibal there, they'd raised the last possible legions they could possibly raise, and they were at the gates of Rome. And instead of, I didn't think he was quite as quick to siege Rome. So instead, he kind of laid waste to all the surrounding areas, and eventually the Romans went enough troops to defeat him. So sometimes you can have a great general, but they don't know how to capitalize on their success. You know,
like you just said, they don't see the big picture.
Yes,
and,
yes.
And you think about the Plains Indians, they had carried on this fight for 50, 75 years.
Oh, yeah.
And were really resisting the military pretty well.
Yeah, and you had the Apache down the south, obviously.
And then once the Civil War was over, they had the resources now to focus. And some of these politicians and landowners decided, hey, we got to figure out this Indian problem, the final solution of the Indians.
A lot of it was the railroads as well. A lot of railroad big money going through those regions. Even the Battle of Little Bighorn, they had a railroad going through that area.
Yes, and I was going to say on that from the C-SPAN video, that battlefield map I had put up, right to the east of or south of the Indian village, there is now a freeway and a
I noticed that as well. Yeah.
So they wanted that. I mean, that was, they, from riding rail trail systems on our bikes for all these years, that's where they laid the rail beds, guys, is right along either rivers or streams, because that's where naturally the land is relatively flat. And you don't
have to dig tunnels. You don't have to, elevate or bridges.
So you see water twisting through the plains like that. That's where you want your road and your railroad to be. So, so they were right in the crosshairs. But again, this repeats through history over and over again, and it's something as gamers we need to promote. So we got Wargaming with Gary. He's got a good point here. How about the Polish Cossack Tartar War, 1666? I don't think this is gamed very often.
Polish Cossack War. Well, I'm not familiar with that. Are you familiar with that, Alan?
Absolutely not. That's I pulled that up when I saw that. I was like, here's something that's obscure that one gamer knows about.
I'm assuming he must be referring to the Polish-Lithuanian Empire at that stage, which was dominating all of Eastern Europe, I believe.
Right.
And the Tartans. They must have been from. They must have been. I think the horsemen from. I'd say south of Moscow. I'm not sure. I don't know much about this.
Well, I've got it on here, and I'll look into that, Gary. That's a great suggestion, because this is what we kind of like when I started doing this week, Sammy and I thought to myself, hey, these are the kind of battles they can either be famous but not gamed, or they're just obscure battles or conflicts that A, no one knows about that are important, and B, that could be gamed with figures from other eras that would still fit in, and you could roll into a game.
This is my friend Callum from school.
Sweet. I love the historical one-upmanship. I'd like to see a medieval battle of Hastings podcast. Yeah, that's where the Normans finally take control.
Yeah. So that's an interesting battle. At the Battle of Hastings, what was stuck out in my mind about that one is once the Anglo-Saxons were defeated at that battle, and William the Bastard, aka William the Conqueror,
yes,
he insisted that all the bodies of that battle were not buried and left to rot, just as a statement of defeat. So quite a chilling image. All those rotting bodies left there for decades.
Now, if memory serves me, that battle was largely won due to archery, right?
Yeah, I actually, when I was doing the Napoleonic reenactments, I actually camped on the battlefield, so it was really interesting to see that. Yeah, archery. Yeah,
arrows.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think, the arc fire. Yeah, they were firing up again, as we talked about in this battle with the Indians approaching an elevated enemy.
Right.
They were firing, because they had better drill with their bows. They were firing up and arching down over the shield wall. Yeah, wearing them down. Yeah,
Hails of arrows, and I don't think those cavalrymen had shields. So yeah, that's why they dropped the horses. Right. They thought they could hide behind the carcasses of their horses.
Yeah, desperation.
And yeah, I mean, I wonder how many of those troopers ended up just,
Yeah, I don't know. Part of me wonders if that was still seen as an unchristian thing. The whole thing of suicide being. I still kind of think that that was suicide was very frowned upon. I know that was more of a Catholic thing, but I still think that was probably very prevalent.
All right, well, we're going to wrap up the podcast today, guys. I want to thank everybody for coming to the podcast. Anyone that's watching this on the replay, this is something we will be doing. I think Sundays is definitely better. A lot of guys are doing stuff Saturday evenings, Saturday afternoons. I think Sunday's more of a slow day for most guys. So I think that's probably something we're going to target for, Sundays at 3. And Sammy and I will put our heads together here over the next couple of days and see if we can pull something out of our magical hat.
We've got some research to do, yeah.
And do some quick research. Any of you guys who have not gotten over on our Discord group, get over there. This is the kind of things we need to be putting on there, ideas from the group, and even throwing out some of the research. Do some of the research for us. Help us out over here.
And call-ins.
Right.
Even if you just want to, be audio and just ask a question or make a point, that'd be cool if you guys, interact. Because we want this to be a group thing. We want people to get involved. We want it to be a conversation. So, feel free to call in or ask us for the link, and just drop in for a couple of minutes, whatever you fancy.
And I want to thank you, Sammy, for coming up with this idea, because it's an amazing idea. Because we need good content for wargaming. It's getting kind of stale.
It inspires you, doesn't it? And it makes you want to get into new areas. And do you know what? Maybe I'll game this area. Or
correct. And this is the part of the learning process. This is how we learn more about history. And bring it to gaming. And even if you don't game it, it's something else we can learn about together as a group. We're building a really nice group. There's some really great guys that are putting up excellent content. Here's one. He says, "Later, guys, the Wizard."
See you later, Simon. See you in the group.
And your friend Callum, great job. Really like the content. Thanks, Callum. Appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Thanks, Callum, man. Appreciate that. Thanks for the support.
So yeah, get on over to Discord, guys. I really am not going to put links up much. Go to some of my older videos. I have some permanent links on there, but I really want to kind of keep it more of a smaller group. I don't want to be this, 1,500, where you got to start having moderators and stuff. So we've had some people flake on us the last couple weeks, but that'll happen. Everyone can't be we can't what's the word? I can't be everything to all people. So yeah, so I see this group really formulating into a good common sense guys who want to deal with real history, no matter where it leads. Just like the battle we talked about today, guys, it isn't pretty. The outcome of the Indians was dismal. However, um, we need to understand these things so we can hopefully teach our kids, grandkids that you know we got to connect as people and try to ignore the government as much as
Yeah,
possible
yeah,
and just get
100%.
along as neighbors. I don't care if my neighbor across the street's from Zulu land. As long as we can be neighbors, I can help him, he can help me, we can just be kind to each other. I think that's the root of what we need to learn from all this war stuff that we all love to follow. What's your
Learn
thought?
about war. Learn about war so we can avoid it.
Yes, learn about war so we can avoid it. And yeah, my neighbors aren't always perfect. I'm sure I'm not always perfect, but if my neighbor needs a hand, I'm going to give him a hand. But with that, we'll bid farewell until next time. Sammy, any closing thoughts?
No, that's it really. I mean, there's yeah, look forward to the next one, and yeah, see you next Sunday.
Sweet. I think we'll you know what we'll do? We're gonna have to
Go
look
on.
into what wargaming with Gary. We're gonna have to look into that. I want to start looking into that tonight, actually.
This is going to take a lot of research.
So
You know,
yeah,
when you approach an area you're nothing about, it's like, whoa,
1666.
how much do I go into this?
We'll find out. I'll take a look at it tonight and see where that rabbit hole leads.
Yeah.
And
I definitely want to cover pirates at one stage. You know, 'cause I know you're doing the Black Sea stuff.
yes, yes,
I know there's so much would be interesting to do. You know,
there's a lot down there because I've traveled the Caribbean a lot, and
I saw that. I saw you did a cruise there last year, didn't you? With the wife.
a ton of cruises, and I've traveled down there. We vacationed down there just as not even being on a boat, but all the different islands. We pretty much have been to all of the Caribbean islands.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot. There's a lot. The Dutch, the French, especially the Dutch. It's fascinating. People don't realize how big of an influence they had in the Caribbean.
Oh, massively, yeah. And it's and Nassau, you know, Providence Island, great story. You know, that becoming independent from the British Empire, resisting the Spanish. You know, and that almost becoming a pirate enclave. You know, where they all started to work together slightly just to resist the empires encroaching on them. Again, it's almost like the battle of Little Bighorn, but on the sea. You know,
correct.
An independent peoples rejecting the outside encroaching world, and the empires coming in with more and more forces to eventually crush them. You know.
Yep. So definitely something we're going to have to cover, and there's a lot there. I'll tell you, it's deep.
Yeah.
So cool. We'll see everybody next time, and
take it easy, guys.
Have a great week. See ya. Thanks, Sammy.
See you guys. Bye bye.
Ciao.